I'm going to share with you the saddest case that I've ever worked on. I represented a 45-year-old woman who had an overactive thyroid. At her doctor's suggestion, she elected to have her thyroid removed. This was an elective procedure, meaning it did not have to happen. She took a bus, a public bus, on the morning of the surgery to the hospital where she was going to have the surgery. The surgery took place early in the morning and it happened without complication. However, after surgery, she remained in the post-anesthesia care unit, the PACU. This is where people go after surgery while they come out of anesthesia. We want to make sure in the PACU that the patient is not going to experience any harmful secondary effects from the anesthesia. Well, the hospital had no bed for her on the admitting floor, so she was kept in the hospital, in the PACU, for about 5 hours. And the beds in the PACU, they're not real hospital beds, they're kind of like gurneys or stretchers. And she was really uncomfortable. And she kept complaining about discomfort in her neck near the site of the surgery. Well, finally, after 5 hours of waiting and not being able to see her family, she was transported from the PACU, which was in the basement level of the hospital, to the 5th floor where she was going to be admitted for an overnight stay. The technician came to transport my client. They successfully navigated the basement hallway to the elevator. And when they got on the elevator, my client sat up and grabbed at her throat where the surgery was performed. And she started writhing on the bed, reaching for her neck. The tech was beside herself, didn't know how to handle the situation. They slowly went up to the 5th floor. And then upon the 5th floor, the tech quickly wheeled the stretcher off the elevator and they got to the nurses' station. All of the nurses came to my client's assistance and they immediately called for a code blue. A doctor came to her aid and the doctor allegedly conducted an inspection of the surgical site. He was looking for blood because if it was bleeding, it would suggest that my client was bleeding at the surgical site. And that's an incredibly dangerous area to bleed, in the neck, because there's not a lot of space. It's a very vascular area. And if the blood is not relieved, it can create a hematoma and choke the airway off. Well, this doctor, rather than stabilize my client on the floor of the hospital, directed that she be transported to the intensive care unit. This was a negligent decision. My client should have been stabilized, but instead, while gasping for air, she was transported to the ICU, which was 3 floors below. So the nursing staff went with my client. The doctor abandoned her. They got her down to the ICU, but on the way, she had gone for too long without air, and she suffered an anoxic brain injury. She had to be intubated in the ICU, and then the clot was ultimately removed in the operating department. My client, her anoxic brain injury was catastrophic in nature, and she became paralyzed. I worked closely with this woman for the next, I'd say the case took about 3.5 years. I would visit her at her home. She lost the ability to speak. She suffered from myoclonic seizures. She lost her fine motor skills, her dexterity. She lost her independence. Her sister had to move in with her and care for her. And of course, due to this awful injury, her life span was depleted by many, many years. And she died about 6 or 7 years after the incident. We got her a multi-million-dollar settlement. The money was used to purchase this woman a home, a one-level home. We installed ramps at the front and back of the house. We got her a van that she was able to use for getting around. She could not drive, but her family members could drive her in a mechanized wheelchair that we were able to acquire for her. We also acquired her a lift, and we were able to pay for around-the-clock care. That money was absolutely critical in making this woman's life tolerable and more comfortable, but it was an awful life that she lived during her remaining years. I'll never forget her. That case came early on in my career. I used the settlement, my fee, to pay off my law school loans. And, you know, it's a painful reality that due to someone else's misfortune, I was blessed with a fee that changed my life. And obviously a client like this and a case like this and a trauma like this undoubtedly will live with me forever. And it motivates me to continue to do good work, because I know that I helped that woman and I made her life more comfortable while she was still living. That's the saddest case I've ever handled.